I still remember the exact moment I pushed my kitchen chair back, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst out of my chest. The screen of my laptop cast a pale blue glow on my face, the silence in our small kitchen heavy all around me. 2 plane tickets filled the confirmation page. Round trip to Key West, 2 passengers, my son, 8-year-old Mason Green, and me. The click of the mouse in my ears was a declaration. It's over, Juliet. 3 years of living in the shadows ended today. 3 years ago, my husband, Ryan Green, was declared dead after a senseless accident during a business trip. There was no body, just a hasty report and a death certificate handed to me by an official who had perfected a look of practiced pity. I remember that day like a scar that has never stopped hurting. I was standing in this very kitchen with Mason in my arms when a trembling coworker of Ryan's told me, "He's gone. I'm so sorry." I sank to my knees, feeling the world split open beneath me and swallow us whole. From that moment on, I lived like a ghost. I had loved Ryan with an intensity that made me forgive his constant travels, the late-night phone calls, and the growing coldness in his voice. He would tell me he was busy, that it was just a phase, that everything would change soon, but instead of getting better, he simply disappeared one day. From then on, I swore I would live for Mason. I sold my wedding ring to pay off part of the mortgage. I got a full-time job at a local bank branch. I refused to rest. Every free minute was spent trying to fill the void I saw in my son's eyes. Mason didn't ask about his dad much, but when he did, every word was a dagger in my heart. Today, when I bought those tickets, I wasn't just buying a vacation. I was buying a promise to myself to move on, to smile again, to teach Mason that life isn't only about loss. I closed the laptop, leaned back in my chair, and let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for years. Mason came running in from the living room, a smile so big it lit up his whole face. As soon as he heard the word beach, he launched himself into my arms and hugged me tight. "You'll be happier there, right, Mom?" he whispered. I didn't know what to say. Maybe, maybe not. But there was one thing I was sure of. This was the start of something new. There was a time when my life looked like it came straight out of a magazine. Everything was perfectly framed. The love, the career, the family photos on the mantle. Ryan Green wasn't just handsome. He had that kind of natural charisma that made people lean in when he spoke. His quick wit could make me smile even on the toughest days. I met him when I was 25, working as a junior analyst at a bank in Atlanta. I was still trying to find my place in the world. He walked into the branch with a confident stride, as if he already knew every corner of the building. He asked about mortgage options, though his body language said he knew exactly what he needed. By the end of that meeting, I was completely captivated, and he knew it. We got married a year later. In the beginning, it was the kind of marriage that made my friends sigh with envy. Spontaneous hikes along the Appalachian Trail, dinners with red wine under the stars, road trips just because. Ryan was just getting into the world of venture capital and took off like a rocket. He quickly became one of the most talked about names at his firm. I felt proud walking next to him at company dinners, his arm around my shoulders, as if we were building something indestructible. Then came Mason, our miracle. I thought that would be the moment Ryan settled down, that he would trade late-night calls for bedtime stories, client dinners for family meals. But it was the opposite. He became even more absent. He was constantly traveling to close deals with investors in places I'd never even heard of. There were entire weeks when Mason barely saw his dad, except for a quick kiss on the forehead in the early morning. I'd pretend not to hear the front door close at midnight. I tried to talk to him, first with tenderness, then with desperation. "Ryan, you're missing his childhood," I said one night, standing in the kitchen, tears stinging my eyes. He hugged me, kissed my hair, and promised it was just a phase, that all this effort was to secure our future. And God, how I wanted to believe him, until the day he just never came back. At first I thought it was another one of those trips he'd forgotten to mention. It wasn't rare. I'd get mad, we'd argue, and then I'd let it go. But this time his phone went straight to voicemail. For 3 whole days I told Mason, "Daddy's busy, honey, he'll be back." But inside me, a dark feeling began to twist, knotting my stomach. On the 4th day, the call came, a supposed snowmobile accident in the Rockies. Thin ice, strong current, body gone. The divers couldn't recover him, they said. I remember holding the phone with one trembling hand while the other shielded Mason's face. He looked at me, confused, from the floor. I collapsed, unable to utter a single word. I thought of all the missed birthdays, the silent dinners, the lonely nights, and I hated myself for still loving him. Then, a week later, the death certificate arrived in the mail. Cold, official, printed in stark letters that closed a chapter of my life before I was ready. I buried an empty urn because there was no body, just a silence that enveloped me whole, and in that silence I built walls around my heart so high that not even Mason could reach me. On the morning of our flight, Mason woke up before the sun. He bounced around the house like it was Christmas morning. His small blue suitcase rattled against the hardwood floor as he yelled, "Key West, here we come!" His enthusiasm was contagious. For the first time in a long time, I felt a spark of excitement, one that wasn't tinged with guilt or nostalgia. While he ran around looking for his sunglasses and his favorite baseball cap, I checked the boarding passes, the sunscreen, the headphones for the 5th time. Everything was there. Everything except the certainty that this was the right thing to do. What if this trip was just a fancy way of running away? What if I was overcompensating for an absence I couldn't fill? I shook my head. This wasn't the time for doubt. In the Uber to the airport, Mason rested his head on my shoulder. "Do you think they have popsicles there, Mom?" he asked, half asleep. I laughed softly. "Of course, honey, and mango and cherry if you want." I turned to the window and watched the city slowly wake up. The juice stands opening, the first school buses passing by, the streets already filling with noise. Everything seemed to be moving on without me, just as it had since Ryan died. But this time, I wouldn't be left behind. We arrived at the airport in the usual chaos. People rushing with coffee cups, garbled flight announcements, endless security lines. But Mason didn't let go of my hand for a second. His little fingers clung to mine with a mix of nerves and excitement. "Are we going to fly soon?" he asked, as we put our backpacks on the conveyor belt. "Almost," I replied, squeezing his hand. As we walked toward the gate, a strange feeling washed over me. It wasn't sadness, but it wasn't happiness either. It was as if my soul was stretching toward an unknown place, trying to remember what it was like to live without fear, without constant pain. A part of me wanted to stop, to go back, to lock the door and keep surviving within my familiar routines and walls. But another part, a quieter, firmer one, whispered that it was time, that we deserved more than just to survive. Mason pressed his face against the waiting room window and murmured, "Look, Mom, you can see the ocean from the sky, right?" I nodded, unable to speak. "Yes. From up there, everything looks clearer, even the decisions that hurt." When boarding was announced, I took a deep breath and adjusted my bag strap. This wasn't just a trip. It was a leap into the unknown. But when I saw Mason's eyes so full of hope and so free of the past, I knew it was worth trying. We took each other's hands, and our shadows disappeared together down the boarding tunnel, heading toward the sea. The flight was full but calm. Most passengers settled in with headphones, books, or neck pillows. Mason pressed his face against the window, murmuring, "We're really going, Mom. We're really doing it." I smiled, stroking his hair gently. I tried to relax. I told myself this trip was to leave the past behind, to make new memories, to heal. But then I noticed it. Mason had stopped looking out the window, his brow furrowed, focused on something down the aisle. "Mom," he whispered, tugging gently on my shirt. "That's Dad." My heart stopped. "What did you say, honey?" I asked, trying to sound calm. Mason discreetly pointed to some seats 2 rows ahead. A man was sitting sideways, talking to a young blonde woman. He wore a wide-brimmed hat that covered most of his face and dark sunglasses. But there was something. The shape of his shoulders, the movement of his hands as he spoke, something that was so achingly familiar. I swallowed hard and forced a laugh. "Sweetheart, you must be mistaken. He might look like him, but it's not him." But then the man turned slightly, and my stomach turned to ice. There it was, that small scar just below his jawline, almost invisible unless you knew where to look. A scar I had kissed hundreds of times in another life. Mason insisted, his eyes wide. "Mom, seriously, it's Dad." I couldn't breathe. For 3 years, I had told myself Ryan was dead, that I had mourned him, buried him, that there was no hope left. And yet there I was on a plane to the beach, looking at a man who resembled my husband so much it hurt. I squeezed Mason's hand tightly. "It's probably just someone who looks like him, honey. Lots of people look alike." But my voice trembled, and he noticed. I forced my gaze back to the window, forcing myself to breathe, to calm the frantic pounding in my chest, but every cell in my body screamed at me to look again. For the rest of the flight, I stole glances, one after another. I watched as the man leaned in to listen to the woman, how his fingers drummed on the armrest, just like Ryan used to do when he was thinking. I told myself it was impossible, that my grief was playing tricks on me. But deep down, a voice, barely a whisper, crept into my mind. What if it really is him? Key West greeted us with warm sun and the salty smell of the sea. It was a welcome change from the dry, cold air of Atlanta. Mason couldn't stop talking about how the ocean looked from the plane, how big the waves were, and how he was going to build the tallest sandcastle on the whole beach. I smiled, or at least I tried to, because my mind was still stuck on the plane, on that man, that face, that scar. It was a coincidence, I repeated to myself, like a mantra. People look alike, kids imagine things. It couldn't be. And yet, something inside me wouldn't be quieted. When we got to the hotel, the receptionist greeted us with a practiced smile and cool, mint-scented towels. We were given a room on the 3rd floor with a view of the ocean. Upon entering, Mason let out a cry of surprise. "Mom, you can see the ocean! You can see everything from here!" He spent the afternoon bouncing between the TV and the window, talking about dolphins, seashells, and sand. For a few hours, I felt normal again. That night, after Mason was asleep, I went out onto the balcony. The breeze was soft, carrying that scent of salt that always made me think that life could start over. I leaned against the railing, closed my eyes, and then I heard something. Voices. 2 people arguing on the balcony right below ours. At first, it was just a confused murmur, like any couple fighting on vacation. But then I heard his voice, a man's voice, thick with frustration. "Do you ever care about anything that isn't money?" I froze. My hands tightened on the railing. That cadence, that rhythm, the way he emphasized words when he was angry. And then a young female voice, defiant, answered, "Don't start with me, Ryan. I told you from the beginning what I wanted, Ryan." My knees buckled, and I had to brace myself against the balcony door. It wasn't possible. It shouldn't have been possible. I crouched down just enough to look without being seen. There he was, broad back, familiar arms, that unmistakable way of moving his hands when he spoke. He was wearing a white t-shirt, shorts, and was barefoot. The hat and sunglasses were gone. There was no doubt. Ryan Green, my husband, the man I had symbolically buried 3 years ago, was standing 1 floor below me, completely alive, arguing with another woman. My first impulse was to run downstairs, to scream at him, to demand an explanation, to scratch at the ground with every buried word I had swallowed for years. But I couldn't move. I stayed frozen, trembling, listening to scattered fragments of their fight. "Do you really think taking me to a cheap hotel fixes things?" she yelled. "It's a 4-star hotel, Camilla," he replied. Camilla. That was her name. I felt a deep, sharp pang, not of loss, but of betrayal. I backed away slowly, one hand covering my mouth to stifle my trembling. Inside the room, Mason murmured in his sleep, "Mom." I went to him, stroking his hair. "Shh, it's okay, honey. Sleep." He sighed, turning onto his side, completely unaware that his world had just changed forever, and so had mine. That night, while Mason slept soundly, a mix of rage, disbelief, and something I didn't want to name kept me awake, standing in front of the window, looking at the distant glow of the hotel pool. I wanted to scream, I wanted to run, I wanted answers. But more than anything, I needed to see him. I tied my hair back, put on some dark glasses and a simple t-shirt, and went down to the hotel bar. The place was almost empty. A warm light enveloped everything, and in a corner, a small jazz trio played something soft, almost melancholic. And there he was, Ryan, sitting alone at the bar, a glass of bourbon in his hands. He looked older, with new lines around his eyes and a weary air that hadn't been there before. But there was no doubt. It was him. My body moved before my mind could. I sat down 2 seats to his right. "Tough night?" I said in a low, neutral voice. He turned his head, surprised for a second. He gave me a tired half-smile. "You could say that." His voice. God, that voice cut through me like a knife wrapped in velvet. "Want to talk about it?" I asked, feigning disinterest, as if I were just talking to any stranger. Ryan shrugged. "Couple drama? You know how it is." I hid my trembling hands under the bar. "She just doesn't get me," he continued, swirling his glass. "She thinks I'm a boring guy trying to be young again. Maybe she's right." I glanced at him sideways. He was completely absorbed in his drink, in his thoughts, in his new life, and he didn't even recognize me. "And what would you like her to see in you?" I asked in an almost whisper. He let out a bitter laugh. "That I'm not just some guy with money, that I went through hell, that I'm trying to do better, but no one sees the whole picture." He paused. "Forget it. You don't want to hear my tragedies." "I'm a good listener," I replied, my heart pounding so hard I could hear its echo in my ears. Ryan sighed, rubbing his forehead. 3 years ago, I lost everything. I thought it was the end. I had to start from scratch, leave a lot of things behind. People. Not because I wanted to, but sometimes you just disappear. Disappear. That's what he called abandoning us. It hurt so much to hold it all in that I felt my stomach was breaking apart from the inside. I wanted to scream. "It's me, your wife, the mother of your son, the woman who buried an empty urn." But I didn't. I stayed there, listening like a stranger, while the man who had destroyed my world shared his version of events with someone who didn't even know his name. Ryan drained his glass and stood up. He looked at me this time with a kind expression. "Thanks for listening. You're easier to talk to than most people." I gave him a tight smile back. "Anytime." And then he left. He walked out of the bar, leaving behind the echo of an incomplete story and my soul trembling over the melted ice in his glass. I didn't cry that night, but for the first time I felt that the truth was no longer buried. It was just beginning to emerge. The next afternoon should have been perfect. The sun shone without burning, the sea breeze carried the scent of salt and freedom, and Mason was digging in the sand with an almost sacred intensity, determined to build the strongest sandcastle on the entire beach. I was sitting on a striped towel, sipping water and trying without success to clear my mind. For the first time in days, I almost forgot about Ryan. Almost. Then I heard screaming. A woman was screaming in desperation, her voice cutting through the constant murmur of the waves. Instinctively, I got up, scanning the beach. I saw her. Camila, the young woman from the balcony, was on her knees next to someone who had fallen on the sand. Her body trembled as she shook the man's shoulders. My heart froze. It was him. Ryan was lying on his side, pale, with an arm twisted beneath his torso. He wasn't moving. For a second I hesitated. I could stay right where I was. After all, he wasn't my problem anymore. But then I saw Mason, who had stopped digging, his small body tense, his little face confused. "Mom, isn't that—" I didn't let him finish. "Stay here, honey, don't move," I yelled, already running. I knelt next to Ryan, noticing his shallow breathing, his pulse weak but present. My hands moved on their own. Years ago, I had taken a first aid course for work. That muscle memory surfaced like a reflex. I carefully turned him over, freeing his arm. I slightly lifted his chin to clear his airway. "He's breathing," I murmured, more to myself than to Camilla, who was sobbing uncontrollably. I covered his face with my towel to protect him from the sun. "Go get help. The hotel, an ambulance, whatever you can find. Now!" I ordered. She nodded and ran off. I stayed there, kneeling on the hot sand, holding the wrist of the man who had faked his death, who had destroyed my world, and whom I was still saving. He groaned. His eyelids fluttered. His voice came out weak, barely a whisper. "Juliet." My entire body tensed. He had recognized me. "Yes," I replied in a low voice with an edge I couldn't control. "It's me." His eyes opened. He focused on me with difficulty. His expression fell apart. Surprise, fear, guilt. A hotel employee came running with a first aid kit. He knelt beside us, checking Ryan's vital signs. I stepped aside, wiping my sandy hands on my shorts. Ryan sat up with help, still disoriented. Camilla returned shortly after, out of breath, with a bottle of water, but he only looked at me. "Juliet, please, we have to talk." I stood up slowly. "No, not here," I said without emotion. "Tonight, 10 p.m. at the hotel bar." He nodded, still in a daze, not just from the fall, but because the woman he had buried in his past was alive and had confronted him. I went back to Mason, who was waiting for me, standing, hugging his toy shovel like a shield. "Mom, was it really him?" I knelt down and hugged him. "We'll talk about it, honey. But for now, let's go back inside." As we walked toward the hotel, the air felt thicker. Tonight, I would finally hear the truth, and I didn't know what I was more afraid of, that he had a good reason or that he had none at all. That night, I arrived at the hotel bar 10 minutes early. I needed that time not to run away. My hands were trembling. I wrapped them around a glass of water and tried to breathe normally. At 10 o'clock sharp, Ryan walked through the door. No glasses, no hat, nothing to hide behind. He looked older, not just from the lines on his face, but from something in his eyes, something I didn't recognize anymore. He approached cautiously, as if I might run or slap him. To be honest, both options were on the table. "Juliet," he said in a low voice, as if speaking my name were a prayer. I didn't answer immediately. I just watched him, waiting. Finally, I let it out. "You have 2 minutes to explain why I buried an empty urn and spent 3 years raising your son alone." He flinched. He rubbed his hands as if trying to remove something that had stuck to his skin. "I didn't want it to be like this," he began. "I had to disappear, Juliet. I had no other choice." I leaned toward him, not blinking. "You had no choice but to fake your death? To make me tell a 5-year-old boy that his dad was gone forever?" My voice cracked, despite my efforts to keep it steady. "Make me understand that, Ryan. Please, make it make sense." He lowered his gaze. "I was in trouble. Serious trouble. Remember that investment I was working on? It wasn't just a business deal. I borrowed money, a lot of it, from people who don't forgive mistakes." I shivered. "And instead of coming to me, of asking me for help, you staged an accident and disappeared? I thought that if I stayed, you and Mason would be in danger. So I left. I cut off everything. I changed my name, my city. I paid back every single dime." "And after you paid, why didn't you come back?" I asked, my arms crossed. "Because I had already destroyed everything. Because I didn't know how to look my son in the eyes. Because I found someone else." My stomach lurched. "Camila? That safe life you built while I was mourning a dead man?" He tensed. "I met her later. She doesn't know any of this." I leaned back in the chair, feeling a mix of disgust and sorrow. For 3 years, I woke up every morning trying not to break. I taught our son how to tie his shoes, how to kick a ball, how to write his name. I told him 1,000 times that his dad loved him when I didn't even know if you were still breathing. He lowered his head. His shame was so visible it was almost pitiful. I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know that. But I had to see you. I had to see Mason. I had to know if there was any tiny chance of fixing something. The tears came then, but not for him. For me, for all the days I had to pretend to be strong while I was breaking inside. I stood up. You don't get to decide when to come back. You can't just show up and act like nothing happened. Ryan stood up too. Please, let me be his dad again. Let me talk to him. I'm begging you. I looked at him, taking a deep breath. Every fiber of my being screamed to throw him out, to banish him from our lives. But then I remembered Mason's eyes that day on the beach, his trembling voice asking if that man was his dad. I sighed. Tomorrow, 11 a.m. at the hotel cafe. You can see him. He nodded, visibly relieved. Thank you. Don't thank me, I said, turning away. This isn't forgiveness. It's a door left ajar, and you better not close it again. I walked out without looking back. My legs were shaking, but my back was straight. I finally had the truth. But it didn't feel like closure. It felt like the start of another storm. The next day, I woke up before the alarm went off. I lay there staring at the ceiling, with one question drilling into my head. Did I make a mistake by allowing this? Letting Ryan see Mason was like opening a door that I myself had sealed with fire and rage. What if he hurt him again? What if that illusion of a father only brought more emptiness? Mason, for his part, was excited. He thought we were just going for breakfast. Hot cakes, Mom? Please tell me they have hot cakes, he said, putting on his sneakers without even combing his hair. Of course, honey, I replied with a fake smile. They're going to be the best. When we arrived at the hotel cafe, Ryan was already there, sitting at a corner table, drumming his fingers on the surface as if time weighed on him. Mason saw him and froze. His brow furrowed as if he were trying to solve a puzzle that was too big for him. Mom, is that him? I nodded slowly. Yes, honey, that's your dad. Mason didn't run to him like in the movies. He didn't scream or cry. He walked slowly until he was in front of the table. Ryan instantly stood up and knelt down to his level. Hey, champ, he said, his voice trembling. It's me, Dad. Mason stared at him, his lips trembling. But you were gone. Mom said. He couldn't finish. The words got stuck in his throat. Ryan lowered his head. I know, and I'm so sorry. I made a huge mistake. I thought I was doing the right thing, but I only hurt you. For a moment, they didn't move, and then Mason took a step forward and hugged him, a small, shaky hug, but real. Ryan wrapped his arms around him as if he never wanted to let go. His body shook, his shoulders trembling. I looked away because, regardless of my feelings, Mason had just gotten a piece of his heart back. They sat together. Ryan ordered hotcakes and orange juice for Mason, coffee for himself. I didn't order anything. I just watched. Mason started asking questions. Where have you been? What were you doing? Why didn't you call us? Ryan answered honestly, but without details that might confuse him. He talked about long trips, about mistakes he had made, about fixing things. I didn't say anything. I let him talk. I let him build, even if it was late. At one point, Mason lowered his voice and asked, Did you miss me? Ryan swallowed. More than anything in the world. That was enough. Mason smiled, timidly at first, then with that wide smile that had lit up his face since he was a baby. He started telling him everything. School, soccer, the sandcastle from the day before. Ryan listened as if every word were gold. When they finished breakfast, Mason took his hand. Can you come to the beach with us today, please? Ryan looked at me silently, asking for permission without words. I nodded. Just for today. The three of us walked to the water's edge, and for an hour, it almost felt normal. A father and son building sandcastles, laughing when the tide washed them away. I watched them, and my heart was torn in two. Happy for Mason, but shattered by everything that had been taken from us. When it was time to leave, Mason hugged him again. Can we see you tomorrow too? Ryan looked at me. We'll see, champ. One step at a time. On the way back to the hotel, Mason's voice was pure light. Mom, maybe he can come back with us. Maybe we can be like before. I didn't answer because I didn't know the answer. The door I thought was closed forever was ajar, and what walked through it could change everything, for better or for worse. That night, after Mason fell asleep clutching his favorite stuffed animal, I went out onto the balcony with a light blanket and a cup of tea that had lost its flavor. The waves broke calmly in the distance. Everything seemed at peace. Everything. But me. Seeing Mason with Ryan had been a wound and a balm at the same time. It had healed something in him and torn something in me. I hadn't heard him laugh like that since he was 5. A few minutes later, someone tapped softly on the window. It was Ryan. I nodded, letting him in. He came in slowly, as if he didn't know where he was allowed to step. It's incredible, he said in a hoarse voice. Mason, he's wonderful. I crossed my arms. He had to be. He only had him and me. He nodded, looking at the floor. I know, and I'm sorry. I can't give you those years back, but I'm here. I want to be here. You can't just come back and act like you didn't fake your death, like you didn't destroy everything we were. I won't. I'm not asking you to love me. I know I lost that right. I just want to be his dad, even if it's just a little bit, even if I have to earn it day by day. I stood in silence. I watched him. He was no longer the man I had loved. He wasn't the stranger from the bar either. He was something in between, a reflection, a ruin, an open question. If you're going to be in his life, I finally said, it will be with conditions. Whatever I want. You'll call before you visit. You won't show up unannounced. You won't promise anything you can't deliver. And if you ever lie to him again, you will disappear for good. He nodded, tears in his eyes. I swear, I don't plan on ruining it again. I turned back to the sea. The breeze hit my face like a rough but real caress. I'm not the same woman you left behind, Ryan. I built a life without you. I rebuilt myself piece by piece. And you did it well, he said in a low voice. You're stronger than ever. I had to be. You made it necessary. We didn't talk anymore. He left with a slight nod. He closed the balcony door softly. I stayed there, my gaze lost among the waves, letting the salty air dry the tears I hadn't even noticed. This wasn't a happy ending. It wasn't a closed tragedy either. It was the truth, and that was enough for me. That night, when I lay down next to Mason, he stirred in his sleep and murmured, Mom, we're happy, right? I stroked his forehead and whispered against his hair, Yes, honey, we're happy, and we're going to be okay. For the first time in 3 years, I said it and believed it. And for the first time, I felt it too. Did you like my story, and which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you liked the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story with love and respect.